Hello and welcome into the Fog.net podcast. My name is Michael Swain, the Kansas beat writer for 24/7 Sports. We're coming to you for the final time after a Kansas football game. I must say, it does feel weird to say that there will not be another Kansas football game until KU opens up the 2025 season at home to Fresno State in week 0. That is crazy to think about, but we're going to talk a lot about Kansas. We're not going to talk a lot about Kansas versus Baylor. We're going to talk some about the Baylor game, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what lies ahead for KU this offseason, maybe some big picture reflections on the season as a whole. Of course, I am joined by Kevin Flaherty. It's snow on the ground. It feels like finally winter is here, Kevin. I know Thanksgiving is a time where a lot of people get to spend time with family. Were you able to spend time with family? How'd you spend Thanksgiving?
Yeah, sure did. It's about 10 minutes door to door to my dad's place, so
Nice.
went over there and got to see my brother have a good Thanksgiving meal and everything. Piled up maybe a little more food than I should have, as you're supposed to. How about you? I understand you actually crossed state borders for Thanksgiving this year.
I did. I don't get the chance to spend a lot of time with my grandparents, just the way things have happened in life. And so for the first time in my life, we did my dad's side of the family went to St. Louis to visit my grandparents, my cousins that lived there. So that was a lot of fun. Really great to spend time with them. But that also meant we drove back on Saturday morning. And in case you didn't notice, Kevin, there was a huge snowstorm. And so we left St. Louis at like 5:30, 5:36 in the morning, thinking, 3 hours, 40 minutes, 3.5. We'll be fine. We get just outside of Kansas City, and all of a sudden, like, the highway comes to a stop. It was like I walked in the door, Kevin, about 15 minutes before the game started, and there was a good chance there for a minute. I was thinking, am I going to be there in time? But we did, and I'm not sure if it was worth risking crashing the old car, but the game was a little bit like us driving. Nip and tuck a little bit. Not great, not pretty. In the end, you made it. You got there, but it wasn't very good. And KU obviously did not put together a great performance. I don't know where to start, Kevin. I think for me, first and foremost, what Lance Leipold said post game. This is a team that ran out of gas, and it looked like it. It just looked like a team that I think you saw the first drive where KU offensively does some really nice things. And then just weird stuff has happened at times this year. And I think, Kevin, the games KU has lost, you can look offensively at some drives that have stalled because KU's gone away from stuff that's working. And this was one of those situations, right? The 2 Wildcat snaps, and then you throw on third down, and it's a stalled drive. Tabor Allen misses a field goal. KU's defense obviously gets a stop, but I think that was the best stop KU's defense was able to come up with all game. It just wasn't a good game for KU, and you start well. And, you look at what KU's done this year. I think they've been pretty solid when they have started well. But then it just totally unraveled from there.
Yeah, and it was an interesting game for Jalen, too, in that I thought that some of the throws that he made were up there with some of the best throws that he's made all year. And they were sandwiched between some stuff that maybe wasn't so great. And the final play of that first drive, it wasn't Jalen's fault. They let a blitzer come totally clean up the middle. They had at least a first down, probably a touchdown there on the throw. If he's able to just stand there and make it, instead he has to scramble out. There's not anything there. Leads to a field goal attempt. They missed the field goal. But one of those days where there were some good plays in there, there just weren't enough of them. And to your point, I thought that was a great place to start, actually. Kansas was just sort of a step behind all day on both sides of the ball, I feel like.
Yeah, and we can start offensively, Kevin, because I do think it's an interesting conversation to have, because you look back at what this KU offense has been, I think really since the Houston game. Obviously, the explosive passive attack has been there, but it has been very much run the ball, have an explosive shot downfield, and then have some more intermediate passing stuff where it isn't as much trying to go boom or bust. And this game plan, or the way it played out, I can't speak to the game plan because I'm not in those meetings, obviously, but it was very different. And Jalen attempted 24 throws during the game. 12 of them were targeted 20 plus yards down the field. If you want to look specifically at like the the right side of the field, 20-plus yards down the field. Jalen attempted 21 passes to that point of the field all season. So over the course of 12 games, 21 passes there. 7 of those 21 were against Baylor on Saturday. So it just puts into perspective, right, how much KU was really taking those deep shots and Jalen just wasn't connecting. Obviously, there were a couple really nice plays throughout the course of the game, but it was just not an aspect of the game that was working for KU consistently. And as a result, if you're all of a sudden your run game is starting to get stuffed because Baylor's really putting guys in the box, they're really sending up run blitzers. If all of a sudden you start trying to take these home runs and you don't hit them, that's how you have 3 and outs and how you have drives that stall at inopportune times. And to me, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, I think, not that they had a bad game from a success rate standpoint, but it did feel a little bit like big play stuff, big play stuff, and so the success rate might have turned out pretty well, but it felt like they would have 3 or 4 successful plays in a row, and then they couldn't build off of that. There wasn't a consistent success rate over and over again. I thought the offensive line, and I think, you post the Pro Football Focus grades every week. I thought the offensive line, the Pro Football Focus grades actually kind of reflected, what they did in that game. They protected Jalen Daniels really well. He didn't see a ton of pressure despite the fact that Baylor was sending guys at him. Yeah. But in the running game, the run blocking grades weren't what they have been. And Kansas, in some cases struggled to get hat on hat. In some cases, they got a hat, but not in the right place. The running game just wasn't as polished as it has been. And you look at the day that Devin Neal had and the average yards per carry and all those things like that, even that, I felt like Swain was, hey, 20 yards here. I think he had a 19-yard touchdown run. He had a 38-yard run. And then you're going to get 2 yards on first down, 1 yard on second down, and you're at 3rd and 7, and everybody knows that you're probably going to throw the ball at that point.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what KU's done such a great job of, right? Staying out of those really predictable situations. And I think that you saw maybe a lot of those mistakes, right, that showed up. And here's how this type of game can happen, right, Kevin, where I've pulled up some of the numbers here. And you can look across the board, right? Yards per dropback for KU, 12.7. That's like 97 percentile, right? That's great. You look at EPA per run, 0.26. That's 86%. Like, these numbers are good.
What isn't good? Yards per play overall. Yeah, 9.1.
It's solid. You know what isn't good? Turning the ball over. And that's exactly what started to creep into this game. And I think you look at what happened in some of those plays, and it's why, you look at the game in the end and the total yards for KU, you're almost at 500. And you think, okay, if a team goes and puts up 500 yards in a game, you're thinking they got more than 17 points. Well, what was happening, right? You've got the Jalen interception in the end zone. You've got a different interception. Obviously, Tavita Noah has the just mind-numbing fumble that just can't happen. And those come off of big plays. And so KU was getting yards, just those critical mistakes. And you factor in, obviously, a missed field goal from Tabor Allen. And that's how you end up in this type of game. And this is the type of stuff that was hurting KU early in the season. And it showed up again. And I think it goes back to this team was not ready to play. And I'll talk about it more on the defensive side. But this was a team that was not ready to play and did not look like they wanted to go out there and win this game. Now, I'm not saying like guys were tanking it. Obviously, no. People want to win. But you could just see the execution that had been there over the course of this, stretch where KU has, had success. Well, a lot of that was gone. And what's the common denominator? Well, some of the stuff changed, right? Where all of a sudden KU isn't doing the same stuff they were doing before.
Yeah. And
they were making the same mistakes that we saw early in the season where, guys aren't carrying the football with the right hand, or they are putting the ball in jeopardy in bad situations. And so that's how you have an offensive performance like this that just leaves a whole lot to be desired.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. One of the things that I thought while watching the game is Kansas is making a lot of the errors that Kansas made when it started off 1-5. And it came really on both sides of the ball, I thought. in terms of it feels like, how long have we been doing this, Swain? Is this our third year on here together?
I think so. Yeah. 2020. Yeah, it is third. Yeah.
Because I think we did 2022
Yeah,
as
we did.
well. It feels like every single week we've talked about Leipold's need for this team to play clean football. And that means, in a lot of cases, penalty-free football. It obviously means turnover-free football. But even beyond that, it means, hey, get your assignment down, do what you're supposed to do, and execute. And this was the first game over the last few that I felt like you could pull back, take the 40,000-foot view and just say, look, like, it wasn't a clean football game for Kansas, and it really needed to be.
Yep, exactly. And I think you talk about clean football, right? That definitely showed up on the defensive side of the ball. And I'll build on my other point there.
Yeah.
Look, go back and watch Colorado, the Colorado game. Go watch how KU tackled. Guys are wrapping up. There's gang tackling. You got multiple guys running the football. One guy tries to wrap up. Maybe he doesn't get it. Maybe he grabs onto his leg. Well, there are two more guys coming. What didn't you see against Baylor? You saw a lot of guys just kind of throwing themselves at the ball carrier. Not a lot of attempts to wrap up. And that shows, I think, just a lack of cohesive effort. And I think that's probably what, watching the game where you're scratching your head like, man, how? And I think a part of that obviously can be fatigue. And Leipold talked about that. I think some of that's just, do you have the desire to go and do it? That's what it comes down to. You have the desire to go and play clean football, and KU didn't. And they got punished. And I think once the ball started to roll for Baylor, and make no mistake about it, this is a really good Baylor offense.
Yeah.
They're putting up a lot of yards against a lot of teams. Granted, a lot of teams that are in kind of the mid-tier of the conference, right? Your Texas Techs, your TCUs, but those are teams that are still just about as good as KU. And so why wouldn't they put up a lot of yards against a defense that has been okay? But in a game like this, KU didn't get those big plays, Kevin, like we saw, against an Iowa State, or to some degree against Colorado, but definitely I think against, BYU, where can you get a turnover at a crucial moment? Can you get a stop at a crucial moment? And those things weren't there. And I think to some degree, you got to put yourself in that position where the offense is straining to make a play, right? The reason Rocco Beck throws the interception is because he has to make a play because of the way the game has gone.
Yep.
Brett's laugh against KU, he has to throw in the end zone because it's a close game and there aren't many possessions. So he's got to go make a play. Well, then KU takes advantage. There weren't many of those moments, Kevin, where BYU had to make a play because it was 2nd and 3 or it was 3rd and 1, right? And so that's just a tough spot to be in if you're a defense. And I just don't think KU came out with the right intensity. And you can see it on film. Like, you can go back and watch and see that this didn't look right. And it didn't look the same as it did 7 days prior. And so what does that mean? I don't know. We could talk about it maybe a little bit later, big picture with the season, but I just don't think, if you're watching the game, it didn't look the same. And that caught my attention.
Yeah. We just talked about doing this for 3 years. Reminded me a lot defensively of the 2022 Oklahoma game, where Kansas really struggled with Baylor's tempo. And in that game, Oklahoma, they kind of ran the ball when Kansas pulled guys out of the box, and they got the ball to the outside, and Kansas couldn't make plays in space in that game. And that was what Baylor was doing. They were just counting the numbers basically and saying, hey, if you're going to put guys in the box to stop our running game, we're going to make you make tackles one-on-one. And to your point, not only did they not make the tackles, they didn't slow those guys up to get help and allow their teammates to get out there as well. And so the other thing with tempo is you have to put people behind the chains, because when you do that, that slows the tempo, because nobody wants to give the ball back 10 seconds later, right? Nobody wants the David Beatty, we just ran 3 plays in 10 seconds and now we're punting.
Yeah.
Because of what it does to your defense. And Kansas never really put Baylor behind the chains. It was extremely rare that Baylor was put in an uncomfortable spot. I also think, too, against Colorado, and you can attribute this to game plan, whatever you want, it felt like Kansas generally got the guys on the back end aligned with the guys they wanted them to cover. And one of the reasons I bring that up is Baylor got 2 early touchdowns when the game was still close, with Monterey Baldwin working against Marvin Grant. Monterey Baldwin is, at least from a play speed standpoint, like if you're looking at like miles per hour that guys are putting up, he's one of the fastest guys in the Big 12, and
Gotta be.
not a guy that you want a safety. And Marvin Grant, who, aligns more box safety typically, not a guy that you necessarily want in that position. And I realize it's one play, but you notice later in the game, they tried to go to Monterey Baldwin. Jalen Todd was out there. Todd got beat, but had the recovery speed to get there and still make a play and help break it up. That was a big difference too. If you're hitting Monterey Baldwin for 12 yards because he's aligned on Marvin Grant, that's one thing, but those are 2 touchdown plays. And, when the game was still close, when you still had reach to Baylor, and it wound up not being executed the way that it probably should have been, whether that's from a personnel standpoint, not having the right guys in the game in the right situations, however you want to describe it, Marvin Grant should not be defending Monterey Baldwin.
Yep, exactly. And it's the same exact thing that happened against Illinois. Kevin, right? You remember that touchdown? I want to say it would have been in the second quarter of that game, maybe, where Grant is covering a guy in the slot, and he just runs basically like a go ball or a fade, and gets in the end zone. Like, it's just it had happened before, and I think for most of the year, Marvin's been really good. But I think that's just a situation, personnel, matchups. Probably not what Brian Bourne would have loved to see, or anybody on the
you can't have it without, at least can't have it without him having help.
Yeah.
Like if you've got a safety over the top where you say, hey, Marvin, if you give up a 12-yard pass here, you're okay, but we're going to have somebody over the top to help you, that's fine, but you can't have him out there in that situation.
Yeah, exactly. And so then look, second half, like everything just snowballed, and you look at the plays at the end of the day, that are run, and just, Baylor did to KU to some degree what KU did to Colorado, where then you just start keeping the ball away, and KU really wasn't able to get much going in the second half. And then the season comes to a close. And I know this is going to be a huge discussion over the next, kind of really 2 months, Kevin, because you think about it, right? There's all December and then all January. And really by the end of January, all the portal stuff, at least for the winter, is kind of wrapped up. I will say this, right? If you're making it 17, 18 minutes into the podcast, thanks for listening, obviously, but we do have a sale going on as well. If you want to get kind of the inside scoop analysis, all of that stuff on the KU offseason, take advantage. I think this ends on Monday at 11 p.m. Central Time, 75% off. That's 8 cents per day, $225 a month, $27 for the next year. It's the best deal we offer. And so if you've been on the fence about it, you've been watching the podcast, listening to the podcast, haven't jumped on board for VIP, now is definitely the time to do it. All right, gonna be a busy couple of weeks and couple months for KU football, and obviously then you're into basketball season, you're into high school football recruiting season is going to pick up, like everything now, Kevin. I keep saying it, dude, but it is a 12-month a year deal.
Yeah,
I get 3 weeks a year usually where it's slow, and so those are a nice 3 weeks, but we're working around the clock to make sure the subscribers have a bunch of exclusive content information. All that good stuff. So, all right, I'll get off my soapbox now.
No, we talked right before the show about how with us doing the big picture stuff, I went to fog.net and I looked at your scholarship chart to see what the scholarship chart is going to look like for next year. And so, a lot of great stuff like that over there to take a look at. So,
yeah, well, we can start talking about it, Kevin. Before we actually, let's do this. Let's talk a little bit about the season.
Yeah.
Overall thoughts. And then we can talk about what's next and kind of do this a little more, in a better order. I think that this is a year that shows the strength, I think, of the culture around the team, right?
Yep.
If this was a team full of quote unquote bad apples, this season would have gone south after, I think, that K-State game in these last couple of weeks would not have happened. The fact that it did turn around, I think, speaks to, I think, just the culture and where things are at. I will say Devin Neal has been very blunt this year, and he has been very honest about his opinions of the way things have gone. And if you missed it after the UNLV game, I think we talked about it, but in between the UNLV game and West Virginia game, he talked about practice habits and how he didn't feel like, there was enough, I don't know if effort's the right word, but just not enough intensity. And then after the game on Saturday, he had a very, very similar comment. And I'll just read the last part here to you if you're listening on the podcast. But, he says he's talking about the season, how KU had a good stretch, but they came up short. And so he says, and so we have to find a way, or future guys have to find a way to prepare differently, have a better mindset from the get-go. I'm not saying the guys were complacent at the beginning of the season, but I don't believe we had the same edge and that same swagger that we played with in years past. So fall camp is going to be really important for the guys' development. That has some alarm bells going on, right? The fact that a team that returned so much had that issue. And I think it speaks to a couple of things. Obviously, if you are a starter who is coming back and you don't have someone chomping at the bit to come and compete with you, to push you to be better, complacency is a hard thing to fight, right? In any walk of life, it is hard. And I think that's something that clearly KU struggled with, and Devin has talked about it. And so if your team leader feels comfortable enough going out there and saying it, right, I think that speaks a lot about what they feel or what they saw over the course of the offseason. I think that's how you have a slow start is a I wouldn't say a bad camp, but a camp where it is not like the same level as Devin said as it has been in past years. So I really thought that was an interesting comment from Devin. And again, if you listen to him talk at all, he doesn't say things without meaning them. And when he picks his words, he picks them very carefully. And so I think that's a very interesting backdrop to have for this entire season and where maybe it went wrong.
Yeah, for sure. Was it after the Illinois game that Jeff Grimes had talked about how he he didn't show guys the tape from the Illinois game? What he showed them was tape from practice, and basically said, if you're not doing this out here, how are you going to do it in a game? And so it was a fairly common talking point, I feel like, that faded away, obviously, as things kind of got fixed. And as they started playing a lot better, you started to see that swagger emerge maybe a little bit more. The players talked about how at practice things were going well. It felt like, too, not that I tracked every single Lance Leipold press conference, but it felt like the number of times we would get him on a Monday and he would come in and say, yeah, practice was really good. It felt like that kind of ramped up towards the end of the season too, and they were playing for something. But yeah, to your point, I think it's kind of easy in a lot of ways. To your point, you had so many returning starters, guys who weren't being challenged for their spots. You had a situation where your quarterback wasn't super active during the spring, and that's not a knock on Jalen. They were getting Jalen healthy. But I also think, that's a situation where if a quarterback is out there, he can sort of be like, hey, guys, knock this off. Like, let's get this done.
Yeah.
There were different factors there, and you did have some new coaches out there. Not that there were a ton of them or whatever else, but there's an adjustment period, a feeling out period. I thought over the course of the year, I thought Jeff Grimes and Jalen Daniels kind of came to an understanding where Kansas was running less of maybe some of the stuff that Jeff Grimes came in and ran early in the season, and they were running more stuff that Jalen was really comfortable running. And so, I do think that there are a number of reasons for it, but at the same time, to your point, if you're going to come in and you're going to go to the Big 12 title game, like was their goal, and potentially reach the college football playoff, as was a goal, those are things that you really need to be aligned and kind of breathing fire at the start of fall camp. It's not something that you flip a switch mid-season and you're better.
Yeah, exactly. And I think something that does get lost in the, I think, Nick Saban, Alabama era of college football is just how hard it is to do this stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Every year. And I think it speaks to obviously just how great of a head coach, Saban is. And you look across college football, right? It is very, very hard to consistently get your team to play at a very high level when you don't have, the overwhelming talent, right?
Yeah.
And I think for this year, I think that's something that, at least for myself, has been an interesting development where you watch a team. And look, it's the second time that this has happened when I've watched, or covered teams, right? I've mentioned it before on the podcast. Iowa State 2021,
Yep.
same deal. Literally the same deal. It is like almost the exact same season, just a one or two losses worse for KU. And I think it's tough. And now KU is going to be in the situation where it is a little bit of a rebuild. And a lot of it's going to come down to what Jalen Daniels decides to do. And
Yep.
he has not committed his future to Kansas. He has not committed his future anywhere. Like, he has not said anything, really. All he has said is that he will evaluate after the season. And so now he's going to go and think about what he wants to do. You got to say right now, Kevin, big picture college football, you look across, you look at Sam Hartman, Riley Leonard, Will Howard, Cam Ward, a lot of quarterbacks who spend kind of 3 years at a place and then go get a big bag at a big school. That's happening now. And so you can't tell me that's not something that Jalen Daniels will consider. Now, KU also can come back and say, hey, we can fill this roster out with talented players. You can come back here, cement your legacy here, be the guy that stays and really puts your footprint at Kansas and get into play in the new stadium. Obviously that's a cool thing, but I think big picture, right, that's a lot of what you can do if you're KU. And obviously now revenue sharing coming. I know there was some stuff out there with Bengali Kamara that I don't know if people really want it out there, but that's is what it is. People have their motivations. And so, revenue sharing is coming, and it is going to create a pathway to programs like KU being competitive in the dollars and cents aspect. And so, for Jalen, we'll have to just see. But I think that's going to be a huge decision that's going to be made this offseason. And we'll have to see where it goes, because that's really, I think, one of the first kind of big tone setters for the offseason is if Jalen decides he's coming back, there's a whole set of dominoes that fall on one side. And if he decides he's going to leave, there's a whole set of dominoes that fall on the other. And I've laid out my thoughts on all this stuff for subscribers, so I'll keep that for them. But that's just kind of my 2 cents big picture.
No, I agree. It sort of starts and ends with that, right? Like, it's, if you look at like a family tree, like how it just branches out like that, like there's one set of outcomes if Jalen comes, and then it branches out from there. There's another set over here if he doesn't. I think the other sort of interesting part is obviously you're starting over at wide receiver, full stop. You're losing four of your top guys, and so you're starting over at that position. You're losing Devin Neal. Daniel Highshaw is away from the team. I think we feel like what's probably going to happen there. At running back, they do have some guys they like at running back. The other interesting part, if you're talking about dominoes, I think is on the offensive line, because if you bring back a really good offensive line and Jalen Daniels, your offense has a chance to be pretty good even while you're breaking in some of those other guys. And Kansas could bring back 4 of its top 6 offensive linemen if Logan Brown makes the decision to come back. He's a guy that's had a great year, Swain. I mean, he really has. And so that's opened up some potential options for him. I don't, I'm not an NFL scout. I don't know what specifically that means in terms of options for him. But if he comes back, I think a lot of people expect Bryce Foster back as well. Kobe Baines, Calvin Clements, started a game or 2 in there as well and is very comfortable at left tackle. He did really well in pass protection against Baylor. And so if those are 4 of your 5 starting offensive linemen where you're only filling one hole on that offensive line and you have Jalen Daniels back, now you're kind of cooking a little bit. Whereas if you lose Jalen Daniels, if you lose Logan Brown, I don't want to say you're starting from scratch, but it's a lot closer to scratch than it would be maybe if you return guys like that.
Yeah, exactly. And then, right, you look at defense and you're basically losing a whole linebacker room.
Yeah.
If you want to move Marvin Grant up there and say Marvin Grant has been a linebacker, you look at safety, you lose OJ Burrows, and if you want to move Grant, it's like Grant very much played both spots this year, right? So you lose OJ Burrows, defensive line wise, Jeremy Robinson, Dylan Woodkey, like it's just a lot of turnover, and so it's going to be a really
Caleb
fascinating.
Taylor had a really good year in a lot of ways.
Totally.
And
I will say this: like there are some really great stories too that are departing, like Caleb Taylor sticking it out and then having the season he did. I can look up his stats real quick, but I think he's a great story. We'll see if Keenan Caldwell decides to come back. He went through senior day. He technically has another season left, but I think sometimes when these guys go through senior day, it explains where their head's at. So, but yeah, like I thought Caleb Taylor, honestly, like I thought he had a great year, and for him to be able to turn things around and finished with, 5 tackles for loss. I mean, that's pretty good. Top 5 on the team. The most of any KU defensive tackle. And think how undersized he was and how he's progressed. Like he's a great story. And so, for KU now, it very much feels, Kevin, I don't know if you feel the same way, but it feels very much like the movement now to a kind of a new era. For the program, right? You think about really if Jalen moves on, it's specifically that. But even if Jalen's back, there are so many new faces that it really is going to just have a different feel. And there's a lot that's going to be up in the air with this team going into next year. And it's going to be really fascinating to see how these next couple months play out, because there's no, like, with the way college football is now, Kevin, and the way things have changed, there's no past reference.
Yeah.
You can't say this is how things have been, so this is the way things are going to be. It's very different. And that's what's going to make this next couple months, I think, super interesting, is the fact that, you can't tell me it's going to play out one way or it's going to play out another way, because you can't really say. It's just going to be ever changing right now, is the best way to put it. And no better example than National Signing Day for high school recruits being on Wednesday.
Oh, it's so
that's
early.
Crazy.
So early. Yeah, the signing day super early. To your point, yeah, I mean, it's been 3 years now that you've just gone to battle every single game with Kobe and Mello as your corners. Like, fix it, forget it, throw it away. And we saw some really good things from Jalen Todd this season.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, Jalen Todd's going to be probably your number one corner next year. He is going to be your Kobe or Mello, and you're looking to see who's going to be there. Taylor Davis had some really good action this year. All of a sudden, he's not your number 3 safety that you bring in, or a guy that you bring in for plays here or there. He's maybe the foundation of that safety group. Blake Harold was a guy that rotated through and really did a nice job, especially as an interior pass rusher. I thought all of a sudden next year you do bring back DJ Withers and Tommy Dunn, but at the same time, is Blake Harold the guy that next year has 5 tackles for loss like Caleb Taylor did?
Yes, he is.
Yeah, I think there's a good chance too. And so, yeah, it's kind of hitting the reset button at a lot of different places. Mm-hmm. Jeremy Robinson, I think, I don't want to say he's had his ups and downs, because he's been pretty, pretty steady, I feel like. But all of a sudden, that's gone. Like, who's your steady guy on one side opposite? Dean Miller is returning at one spot. Can one of your freshmen be one of those guys? Do you have to go into the portal to get one of those guys? There are a lot of question marks there. And, it's kind of funny, I think, for people who are maybe a little bit more casual with watching this stuff. Like, they may roll out to that season opener and watch it and be like, I don't recognize a lot of the names out here. Whereas this year was one of those teams that I think fans really got behind because of their process, because you had so many multi-year starters. I think that they were guys that, like you said, stories, people related to them, related to the players themselves. And now all of a sudden it's a new era, and about to be a new era once this COVID extra year thing finally rolls off. And so it'll be interesting to watch.
It will be, and I can't wait for that to happen, Kevin. I'm so tired of having to go click on people's profiles to do my own math on the eligibility left.
Yeah.
That's going to be so nice to not have to worry about. But yeah, it just makes for an interesting offseason. And obviously, I think people want to talk about coaching changes. Look, like I don't know, it's such a weird thing. Like it's people's jobs and lives and stuff. So it's really weird. I don't know. I always feel very apprehensive to speculate on that stuff. But I do know that Jeff Grimes will be back.
Yep.
So that's what I can tell you for sure. And so
Yep.
outside of that, I know Leipold every offseason evaluates stuff. I know people would like for something new at defensive coordinator. Look, I don't know. Like Borland's been with Leipold for a long time, and I'm a big fan of Brian Borland, the person. I think he's been awesome. And I think he's super honest and one of the best coaches I think I've worked with in terms of what he gives and what he tells you. I've been around plenty of coaches, offensive and defensive, that don't say a whole lot and they don't make it interesting. I respect Borland for A, accountability, and B, for I think what he's done. So I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen, but I know Leipold will look at it like he does with everything. So, and after a season like this, I don't. Can you go status quo? Can you run it back? I don't know. Like, genuine. That's me. I genuinely don't know.
Yeah, I think it might be tough, and I've always said, to your point, I will never call for a coach's job for performance. Like, if Coach hauls off and hits a player, yeah, like I have no problem saying, hey, that guy should be gone. But if it's a performance thing, these are coaches with families and a lot of other things there. And generally, I feel like Swain, when it's time to maybe let go of a coach, I won't have to call for their job because the evidence and the things will be there that will indicate that it's going that way. Is this, I will say, is this the last year of Borland's contract? Would he need a new contract
Well,
to continue next year?
technically, no, he would not need a new contract. He has an option for next year.
He has an option. Okay. Yeah.
So that's where things stand.
But yeah, to your point, I don't know I don't know if you can run it back status quo or not. And it may be that the powers that be decide too that if you're going into a new era of quote unquote Kansas football with a lot of changes to the roster, that maybe you need to make a change elsewhere. But to your point, I mean, it's I've really enjoyed getting to work with Brian Borland too. I mean, he's been fantastic, not just in terms of I mean, he's a great quote. Let's be honest. When he talks about wanting to face a quarterback who's wearing a giant knee brace that can't run around at all, when they're getting hurt by scrambling, that's great. But I think to your point, one of the things that he's great at is actually explaining what's going wrong, why it's going wrong, and taking accountability for when it does go wrong as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. So it's gonna be a wild off season, Kevin. It's gonna be wild. Any final thoughts on this year? Obviously, playing games at Arrowhead, that was really weird. I think it's pretty cool to go cover games there. I think for fans too, at least some people I've talked to who season ticket holders go to games. They said they enjoyed it. Obviously, I know everyone has different experiences at games, so I obviously don't want to speak for everybody, but some people I've talked to have said they have enjoyed it. Very different, but I know that a lot of people are excited for what next year can look like for KU at a renovated stadium. It is wild continuing to drive by there. It's how construction works, Kevin, that you see everything go up and it doesn't look like there's a whole lot going on. But with the way it is, right, that they got the electricians and you got there's so much that goes on once you have the actual structure up that, the next 8 months, the next 8 months, it's going to be crazy to watch it get finished off. So it's going to be really cool to see what it looks like next fall. And so that's going to be a different, I think, something completely different, right, for everybody. So that'll be exciting as well. But any final thoughts on the season before we close it out?
I think the bowl game would have been a storybook ending after the start. Totally. But one of the things that you and I had talked about on here was 5-7 looks a lot different than 3-9. And being able to walk into a recruit's house and say, hey, things went against us. We still went 4-2 in the second half of the season. We were able to rebound. Our culture is strong. I think that the way that they ended the year, even if the Baylor game wasn't an ideal actual ending to the year,
Yeah.
it is something that could be positive that they could carry forward. And quite frankly, if next year they wind up achieving maybe at a level that people don't expect, if they find a way to go back to a bowl game next year, even if it's
Yeah.
just 6-6 with a relatively new roster, I think you might look back at this year and say, hey, things maybe didn't go all that well, but
Yeah.
it was something that showed that the program was on more solid footing than maybe we thought, and that it was 1-5, and Kansas didn't pull an Oklahoma State, they didn't pull Florida State,
Mm.
they didn't have the meltdown that Utah wound up having over the course of the season. Arizona obviously was picked really high and wound up having just kind of a tragic season as well. The bounce back that you saw in the second half of the season, I think, says a lot about the culture of the program, to your point earlier, as well as the players who were in the program and their ability to keep working forward on that.
Exactly. So that's what we got. Obviously, thanks for all of you for tuning in every week. I know this is not what we were predicting, and I've been very, very ready to admit how loud wrong I was about this season. But hey, that's college football. And let's actually finish here, Kevin. Big 12 title game next week: Arizona State, Iowa State. I'm really excited for this game,
Yeah,
because I think they're two kind of similar teams, but also very different. I do find it really interesting, though, that I don't think they played this year during conference play.
I believe you're
So
right.
that's going to be even different for a Big 12 title game, where it has consistently been two teams that have played each other once already in the year. The fact that this time it's going to be different. It's opened it as a 1-point spread. Like, Kevin, I am all in on what the Big 12 is right now. And I know Joey McGuire made some points about, hey, if you were to look at across college football, the Big 12 gets talked down on, when in fact, it's the playoff will do the talking for the Big 12,
Sure.
regardless of what happens. But this has been a great season in the conference, and I'm really fired up for the Big 12 title game next week. And I think we're starting here where the Big 12 year in and year out is going to be like this, where the last day of the season, you're looking up freaking tiebreakers to see who makes it, who doesn't. Like, I think this is what the conference is going to end up being, I think, for the next few years.
Yeah, you've got just a huge clump of teams where it's so cliche, right? In the NFL, oh, any given Sunday, but in the Big 12, with limited exceptions this year, it is just about any team can rise up and beat anybody else, and you've got matchups make fights. Baylor beat KU worse than KU's gotten beaten all year.
Yeah.
You beat Iowa State in a game that, for the most part, wasn't really that close for a lot of the season. Iowa State beat up on Baylor. So it's kind of it styles make fights. And to your point in that title game, I think the style is going to make that fight. Iowa State this season not been great stopping the run. Arizona State terrific at running the ball with Cam Scatterbo. At the same time, Arizona State's defense can get got by Higgins and Knoll and Rocco Becht and guys like that. And so this could be one of those games that's 35-31, and the team with 31 has the ball with a minute or two left, and a potential college football playoff berth on the line. And what more could you ask for than that?
There's so much right now, Kevin, that it's just different about college football. Am I a fan of it? Probably not, but is what it is. The fact there can still be stuff like this, right? Where if you look at Arizona State, right, stories like Scadbo are really cool, right? Started his career at Sac State in Sacramento, California, which I've been there, and not the best. And he goes to Arizona State and helps them. You've got someone like Rocco Becht, who's a freshman, or started as a freshman, redshirt freshman, and is now leading the team. And if they had a stat, I was watching the game last night, some of his numbers are like mirror images of Brock Purdy's numbers. Like, you can look at BYU, what they're able to do, pick to finish, near the bottom of the conference. They're competing at the top. Colorado, great story. I think it's really cool that this is what the Big 12 has come into, where it is so competitive, and it is, it just feels like a fun conference, and you don't have a bunch of talking heads out here saying why 3-loss Big 12 teams should get in that large bid to college football playoff spot, but that's probably a different conversation for a different day.
Yeah, for sure. It's fun though, and it's the Big 12 has some great storylines moving forward, and they even have some coaches that could wind up shaking up the conference even further. I think Houston's going to be really good under Willie Fritz, and I think next year, Swain, kind of as KU hits this reset button, I actually think there could be some Big 12 teams next year that have the potential to win a college football game or a college football playoff game.
I sure hope so.
Yeah, they should be able to win a college football game at some point. But no, a college football playoff game, because I do think that there were some teams this year that were a year away. Yeah. Surprisingly enough, one of them is in the Big 12 title game in Arizona State. That is a very young roster with the exception of Cam Scatterbo. And so if they can find somebody to run the ball next year, they've got a chance to be really good next year. And so I'm interested to see how this new look Big 12 continues to grow.
Yeah, well, we'll be here next year. Keep talking about it. So thanks as always for listening. It's been a fun year to document, and obviously we'll be back with some podcasts over the course of the season. Don't think we'll do weekly. There's not enough news to do it weekly, but when there's big stuff happening, we'll come back and we'll chat about it. So obviously, Kevin, thank you for being willing to do the podcasts. It's been a lot of fun, bud.
Always. It's a blast.
Awesome. Well, hey, all right, plug your stuff, then I'll plug ours and we can get out of here.
All right. Sounds good. You guys can see me across Kansas City Sports Network, both on Pay Heat, as you can see there if you're on YouTube, which is our KU related podcast. And then I'm also the host of the Verbal Commitment podcast with Ryan Wallace, a coworker of Swain's over on the K-State side. Go Power Cat. We talk about Kansas, Missouri recruiting. So it's a good time over there.
Awesome. Well, hey, thanks as always for listening to the Fog.net podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, drop a comment below. If you're listening on the podcast platform of your choice, please leave a rating and review. Those go a long way in helping us out. For Kevin Flaherty, I'm Michael Swain. Thanks as always for listening, and we will talk to you all again soon.